Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 13th of December, and as always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information. And today's one of those days where it is critical, especially on the North Slope, where winds are howling, snow is blowing, and visibility is near zero for many locations there. We'll take a look at the pictures in just a minute. You can always check your forecast on the phone at 1-800-472-0391. Find us online at weather.gov/Alaska. And if you can't find what you want, I'm happy to help. You can find me easily on email at david.snider@noaa.gov. Let's take a quick look up to AKwx this afternoon. A look south from the weather camera there shows blizzard conditions occurring there. You can see a little bit of visibility right there in the near term, but very little to be seen out there on the horizon. That was a look at AKwx as about 2:30 or so this afternoon. Look a little bit further down the coast to the west, and this is Point Hope. North still able to walk around a little bit there on the streets, and not as harsh or sharp as conditions as we've seen across some parts of the North Slope earlier today, but certainly a possibility for wind and snow in the region this afternoon. A look at the hazardous weather across the region does have blizzard warnings out for the North Slope as we go through the afternoon and all the way through tomorrow afternoon until about 3 o'clock. Blizzard conditions may be encountered there. 2 inches or about 3 inches of snow in total, a lot of that, of course, blowing around. Winds, though, are going to be the big issue, gusting up to about 50 miles per hour, and that could drop visibility below that quarter-mile threshold, which means you could be in danger if you're trying to travel around. So be extra careful, use caution, and follow your blizzard guidelines there when you're out there working or just trying to get from house to house. As we look into the Kobuk and Noatak valleys, we're also looking at a winter weather advisory there. You might see about 3 to 7 inches of snow. Light glaze is also possible. It's that warm, and enough of that warm air has made its way into the region. That could put a little bit of ice on some surfaces, so do be careful as you're walking around there. It won't just be snow, it looks like. That will take you through about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The upper Koyukuk is looking at some gusty winds. Southeasterlies gusting up to 40 miles per hour through the afternoon and evening hours will be possible. And the same goes for areas out west and across the Alaska Range and Deltana and Tanana Flats region. Strong and gusty winds will be possible as we go through the next 24 hours. A lot of this wind should start to lie down a little bit more as we get into the afternoon and evening hours. However, around Delta Junction, you might still be looking at gusts out of the southeast up to 50 miles per hour. Places around Denali, probably looking at the strongest winds, the southerlies gusting up to 70 miles per hour, and around Mentasta Pass also expecting to see gusts around the 70-mile-an-hour mark. So hold on to your hats, hold on to the steering wheel, hold on to the yoke, and just be careful out there as the wind is pouring through the region. Here's a look at the satellite picture. And once again, we're focused on a deep low across the Gulf of Alaska that has been moving northward, and that strong southerly fetch across the central and eastern Gulf is our primary weather maker right now. This is the western side of a very resilient ridge across the western parts of North America. We'll take a look at that jet stream here in just a little bit. But this is the part of the weather maker that is moving over the Alaska Range, creating those southerly winds and helping to encourage that strong easterly flow across the North Slope. And then, of course, that warmer air feeding back into the back side of this weather system that's creating the potential for light glazing and more active weather across the northern interior and parts of west and southwestern Alaska, and certainly a lot of wind around the Anchorage region as well. A look out west shows there is another low building across the western Bering Sea and into the western chain. That will be the trend and the weather picture as we go ahead toward Friday and Saturday. You'll see that moving across the chain and into the western Gulf, and it does look like it will carry quite a bit of wind with that as well. For right now, though, the new focus is periods of heavy rain across the southeast. That will be the case for about the next 24 hours or so, and it does look like it will put down enough rainfall to bring up some rivers and streams into close to bankful levels, but at this point, flooding is not expected in the southeast as a rule. Low pressure is about 1,004 millibars south and west of Sitka. We've had some heavy rainfall moving through the Sitka region. We expect more of that in the next 24 hours. Another wave of colder, slightly drier air Moving ashore on the west coast, a 990 millibar low there, and several waves of low pressure stacked to the north across the interior and helping to draw and focus that wind across the North Slope in blizzard condition form. Out west, a 978 low is working towards Shemya and Attu. Some areas of rain around Dutch Harbor and Unalaska this afternoon. Tonight, periods of rain mixed with snow, maybe even some freezing rain for some parts of the interior. Remember, it's going to be wind across the Alaska Range through the evening hours before that starts to lay down. Periods of heavy rain possible for southeast, a 1,000 millibar low there just south and west of Yakutat. Low pressure south of Kodiak will keep a chance of rain and snow near the Alaska Peninsula. And again, that very tight pressure gradient across the north should focus wind and blow the snow across the North Slope, so blizzard conditions are expected to continue there. High pressure tries to set up shop just briefly north and west of Nunivak Island at 1,003 millibars. Really not that strong, and it will go away. But you can see another surge of warmer air moving toward the Aleutians, and with that we start up our new weather maker. This is a really complex system out here across the southern Bering. You can see 3 low pressure centers there trying to organize, and this will eventually consolidate into a tighter, deeper low pressure system across the western Gulf. So we're kind of catching this in its development stage. And as that happens, a lot of that warm air is wrapping into the system, so we're going to have periods of rain and snow mixed up moving through the Aleutians, and some of that may graze the Pribilofs there. You're looking at Thursday afternoon around St. Paul and St. George. Don't be surprised if you get rain and snow there. Across southeast, periods of heavy rain will still be possible into the afternoon tomorrow. And north of the Alaska Range, it is possible that we'll have enough warm air to see some brief freezing rain or maybe rain mixed with snow in that region. So precipitation types may go back and forth for places like Northway and Eagle. Across most of the interior, it is still cold enough for snow, and many across the North Slope will start to see some improvement in the wind as we get into Thursday. By Friday, the pressure gradient tightens up again across the Chukchi coast, and we could be looking at another return to near blizzard conditions or maybe just past that. So keep that in your plans as you're moving toward Friday. A look toward the southern Bering, 968 millibar low there is the old pressure center. The new one is forming south and west of Kodiak and southeast of Sandpoint, really in exactly the same spot. And once again, that thrusts a little more rainfall towards southeast, tightens the pressure gradient across south central, the Kenai Peninsula and the Alaska Peninsula, as well as Kodiak Island and Bristol Bay, and many of our western Alaska Range passes, as well as areas all the way up to Norton Sound. So the wind that we've been working with across many areas in southern Alaska and maybe even into the interior could easily set up again as we head into Friday and perhaps even into Saturday. So we're not done yet. A very warm situation continues into the weekend. Here's a look at temperatures as we go into Thursday morning. Mid to upper 40s for southeast. A very warm evening and overnight period. Lower 30s for most of south central, the middle Tanana Valley and central interior back in the teens and 20s. 12 for Fort Yukon. It looks like 9 to about 10 degrees around Prudhoe Bay and Deadhorse. 6 in Barrow, 25 in Nome. And Bethel, you're expecting overnight lows in the mid-20s, with Unalaska and Dutch Harbor just shy of 30, 20 for St. Paul and St. George, 33 in Kodiak, and highs tomorrow there could reach 40 degrees. Mid to upper 40s for southeast, another mild day for you. Above 40 degrees for many in Prince William Sound, mid-30s to low 40s across Cook Inlet regions, the middle Tanana Valley, teens and 20s, the North Slope, single digits to about 10 degrees, 25 in Nome. Friday morning, you're back in the teens for the central interior, southeast 30s and 40s, southwest in the mid to upper 30s. The North Slope single digits, Nome about 15, Shishmaref near 18. And high temperatures on Friday, back in the mid-teens for the Tanana Valley and Fairbanks, south central in the 20s and 30s, 41 in Kodiak. Lower 40s for most in southeast. Barrow and Wainwright back in the single digits, and south and west, you're looking at temperatures that are just at or even above freezing as we go into the afternoon.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Moving on to flying weather now, IFR will continue across Kotzebue Sound and most of the North Slope and the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range. You may have some limited areas of MVFR around Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass in the morning, but IFR will certainly surround the passes on either side. Across the west coast through the Yukon and the Kuskokwim valleys, you'll experience IFR, and a lot of that extends up the Alaska Range. MVFR for many areas around the Gulf Coast as you start out in the morning, and IFR around Chilkoot and White Pass all the way up toward Yakutat and along the outer coast of southeast. By Thursday afternoon, MVFR will take over most of southeast. You'll still see IFR across some of the higher terrain, including Chilkoot and White Pass out toward Yakutat. And then look for improvements around Cook Inlet, around Prince William Sound, and most of the west coast will still be limited at least by MVFR, with occasional IFR popping up from time to time. But the more widespread area of IFR should linger across the North Slope and, again, the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range. For Friday morning, little change up north. You'll see IFR conditions extending down into the middle Yukon Valley and Across the Kobuk and Noatak Valley, look for at least MVFR conditions there and over most of the Seward Peninsula. The southwest coast looking at MVFR with a limited area of IFR across some of the higher terrain, and also MVFR conditions lingering across south central and southeast. Still looking at IFR across some of the higher terrain, but Chilkoot and White Pass might see some minor improvements, but back to IFR by the afternoon. Look for IFR across Portage Pass to develop by Friday afternoon, as well as some of your western Alaska range passes. Just off the coast of Ammonok and north of Nunivak Island through Etolan Strait, expect IFR conditions there, and the North Slope still under IFR as we get into Friday afternoon. Here's your pass conditions in detail now. We do expect Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass to likely hold at least at MVFR and even more likely probably IFR conditions there, but around that area you may see some hit and miss opportunities. Adigan Pass also looking at IFR through Thursday. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, we expect to see some improvements as the day goes on. It's going to go back and forth as we go through the rest of the week. Rainy Pass, IFR conditions are expected to start the day with some minor improvements as the day goes on. Windy Pass, more of the same. IFR and MVFR conditions developing as we go. Isabel Pass, we expect to see IFR with a transition to marginal conditions as the day goes. Metasta Pass holding it, at least MVFR. Rain and snow will be in the region. And as we get into Tanita Pass, look for IFR conditions there. For Portage Pass, at least MVFR, but IFR a little bit further across the Sound and also across the Alaska Range as you go across Cook Inlet. And Chilkoot and White Pass looking to be IFR really through most of your Thursday. Freezing levels now, not a lot of a change out in the west. The surface freezing lines holding near Bristol Bay. Out across southeast, a pretty steep gradient, anywhere from 2 to about 8,000 feet from Chilkoot and White Pass and about Yakutat all the way down toward Ketchikan and Annette, closer to 8,000 feet. When you lump that in with the icing potential, you can see areas above 4 to about 6,000 feet for most of the mainland. For southeast, those levels are considerably higher, though, to get into that good ice growth zone. It's going to be above 10,000 feet for most folks, so not major concern there. Above about 3 to 4,000 feet for most of the Bering, all the way out towards Shemya. And again, most of this will be at least isolated moderate throughout your Thursday. The jet stream has the position of our ridiculously resilient ridge now across the west coast of the lower 48 in North America is moving just a little bit. You can see the main trough is also shifted a little bit further eastward, so the focus of this deep southerly flow is a little bit further east and south right now, and that means all those storm perturbations or those waves are going to be traveling in a slightly different orientation. However, this is still latching onto a lot of moisture, and you can see the storm track across the North Pacific really hasn't changed that much. It's really just the position of this ridge. So as we get into that southerly flow, we're still dealing with southwesterlies at 9,000 feet from anywhere to about 10 to 40 knots across southeastern Alaska and most of the Gulf. And across the west coast, you're still dealing with low pressure and southerlies across the region at 30 to 40 knots. Light winds up around the North Slope, anywhere from 10 to about 25 knots again from the south. At 3,000 feet, a little bit more of a southwesterly flow here across the Gulf, 25 to as strong as 50 knots in some cases. Light winds across south central, southerlies across the west coast, and a little bit more of a westerly orientation parallel to the Brooks Range at about 10 knots there. Otherwise, our stronger winds out across the Aleutians surrounding the areas of low pressure. Turbulence then will still be focused to southeast. Areas were highlighted for a lot of low-level wind shear today across the Panhandle. Hopefully a lot more of that will improve, but again, that strong southerly flow is keeping things stirred up across the region. Below 6,000 feet with considerable moderate is still likely for southeast as we go through your Thursday, and for the central and eastern parts of the Aleutians and the Alaska Peninsula below 4. Around the Alaska Range today, high wind warnings should improve as we go into tomorrow, but watch out for some considerable chop across the region, generally below about 6,000 feet. Stay with us. We'll be back with your marine weather in just a few. Welcome back to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider. As you well know, you can get forecast information for any day of the week. Today, tonight, tomorrow, out to 6 or 7 days. It includes the high and low temperature, the wind direction, the chance of rain or snow in your part of Alaska. But did you know that there is information available to forecast out to 2 weeks? So the question is, how would you use that information? And here to answer that question today and tell us a lot more about climate services from the U.S. National Weather Service Alaska region is Rick Toman. He's the program manager for the Climate Science and Services. And Rick, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Dave.
How would we use information that is out to 2 weeks instead of just the high and low and the chance of rain?
Well, Dave, as we move out in time, of course, forecasts become more uncertain. So as we move into that second week from now, we're not looking at specific highs or lows or precipitation amounts at any given place. What we can do with the state of the science at this point is get a handle on patterns. So we can say things like increased chances for stormy weather in the Bering Sea in 2 weeks, or we've been in a cold weather pattern, looks like 8 to 10 days from now, that pattern's going to change. Those are the kind of forecasts that we can currently make in that second week.
So you're increasing lead time for perhaps big or small weather events and telling us the likelihood of maybe more coastal storms or wind events in some areas?
Those are the kinds of things that that we hope to be able to let Alaskans know in the second week forecast. And if you have an activity or an event that you would find that kind of advance notice useful, whether it's moving stuff off of the beach, whether to go out hunting or to come back from camp, those kind of decisions, the week 2 provides the opportunity for you to get a handle on that kind of information.
Okay. What other type of weather impacts that we're familiar with might Alaskans use climate services for?
Well, in the forecast realm, we can go provide some information from this week 2, say the 8 to 14 day period, on out to the monthly and even seasonal time scale. Now, those monthly seasonal forecasts are still kind of just really very much pattern dependent, and the amount of detail that we can provide at this point is still pretty limited. Generally, indications of how temperature and precipitation will fall in maybe above normal, below normal kind of range. But in the week 2 period, we can be considerably more specific than that as far as the general patterns and really the impacts on Alaskans.
Okay, so we would be talking about generalizations there that would tell us that the period might be more stormy, might be more hot, more dry, more cold, and situations like that.
That's correct. So we're not going to be able to say in which community, for instance, there's the threat of coastal flooding, but we can often be able to tell we're moving into a pattern that would be conducive to big Bering Sea storms. So if you're in an area that could potentially impact you, you'll want to pay attention to the weather forecast.
Okay. Now, every day and every hour of the day, the National Weather Service is working on a forecast for the next day. But how do you start your forecast process for that extended period that goes out beyond 7 days?
Well, the way things work right now, we start off with the expected general flow pattern for Alaska and the whole world, really, and then we narrow that down to Alaska. So we start off with the basic computer model forecast. There's quite a few different computer models that we look at, bring those together. And then another important part of that is we attempt to assess the confidence. The reality is often 2 weeks away, the computer models are very divergent. They have lots of different solutions, and that's an indication that we don't have much confidence. But when we see more agreement in that time frame, and when that agreement is a pattern that will be potentially very impactful for Alaska or is a big change from what we've been in, that's when we can then take that expected pattern. We have computer models forecasting it. We've assessed the confidence. Now we can move that forward. How, using our experience as Alaskan weather forecasters, how does that typically play out for Alaska? So is this a stormy pattern for the Bering Sea? Is this an extra rainy period for Southeast? Is this the kind of pattern that generates strong winds potentially in the Anchorage Bowl? Is this a deep cold pattern for the interior? All of those are the kind of things that we're looking at in these large-scale patterns. That's very different than telling you that the winds on 10 days from now are going to be gusting to 120 on the hillside. We're looking for patterns, not the very specific information that the Weather Service will then hone in on as the event gets closer.
So the idea is to keep the 5, 6, 7 day forecast the same, where you are getting the standard high and low temperature and the chance of wind or rain, but further out you get a broad general forecast, but as the time gets closer to that event, we'll get a lot more specific.
That's correct.
Okay, very good. So how can people use this information if I am out in the bush and I want to see, is a coastal storm expected in my region, or is a chance for that improving over the next 2 to 3 weeks, where could I go to get information like that?
When we see that potentially impactful or a big change in the weather is coming 8 to 14 days out, typically we will start to highlight that on the Weather Service Facebook site. We might produce a YouTube video highlighting that, linking that on our Facebook site. So often we don't, at this point, we don't have much to say in that because we're really looking for those forecasts of opportunities. But one thing we can say very likely as we go through the next 2 or 3 years, there'll be more and more of this kind of forecast information available in that week 2 time frame.
Okay, and something that emergency managers and city planners and folks in villages might be interested in keeping an eye out for, looking for that information to be headlined, whether that's on social media or perhaps through the National Weather Service channels there to get information from you to make better plans a little bit longer term and make better preparations in the event that things become a little bit more unsettled.
Absolutely. Climate Services with the National Weather Service Alaska region is talking to the state of Alaska every week, apprising them of that 2-week outlook. And on the social media side, we are working to keep Alaskans informed so that when we think we have some confidence in a high impact or a big change, that's the best way right now for folks to find out about that. Twitter, Facebook, so stay tuned to your National Weather Service.
Very good, a developing program. Rick Thoman with the National Weather Service Alaska region. He's a Climate Science and Services Program Manager. Thanks so much for joining us again, Rick, and I hope to have you back again soon.
Great, thanks Dave.
For another edition of Alaska Weather Facts, I'm meteorologist Dave Snider. We'll see you next time.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Time for a quick check of your sea ice edge, and we're looking at the Bering Strait here. Here's Nome, Whales, Shishmaref, Kivalina, Point Hope, and Gamble. And if you look closely around the southern edge of St. Lawrence Island, you can start to see some marginal ice showing up there. A lot is forming where a lot of folks don't live, but ice is slowly coming into the Bering Strait region. And overall, you can see the Chukchi ice is beginning to fill in. There's still plenty of open water there, especially in the Bering Strait and just north, but changes are happening there. As you look further out, you can see that marginal ice zone extends a little bit further north and west of Point Hope, but the ice is increasing. Now, there are a few areas where the wind is moving the ice away from the coast, creating some small polynyas from time to time. So if you look off the coast and you see open water, the ice probably isn't that far away, assuming that you've had ice already this season. Let's take a look at southeast, and winds are from the south across Sitka to Craig, Ketchikan, and Annette, looking at a little bit more of a southeasterly flow. Gusts up to 40 miles per hour at Stevens Passage, and southerlies inside the Lynn Canal, 25 knots with a 5-foot sea. Westerlies coming across the North Gulf, 14 to 17 foot seas are expected there. For Friday, look for a strong south and southeasterly flow. This on top of periods of heavy rain moving out of the region. Should see some improvement by Friday. Strong south and easterly winds will be blowing through the inside passages there, 20 to 25 knots with stronger gusts, again in the Stevens Passage region. Southerlies on the outer coast could be up to 30 knots with 10 to 11 foot seas. Across South Central, winds should be fairly light for Thursday, 10 knots. Inside of Prince William Sound, 2-foot seas, small seas across the north and western Gulf compared to what we've seen recently. 1 to 2 foot seas down Cook Inlet there, and a lot of the ice has melted away across the Turnagain and Knik Arms there. A lot of a reduction in that sea ice coverage. It's not all gone, but a lot of it is gone. North and easterly winds across Cook Inlet on Friday. 4 to 5 foot seas there, 9 foot seas west of the Barren Islands. The south and easterly flow starts to pick up once again. The higher seas generally south and east of South Central. Easterlies inside of Prince William Sound up to 20 knots with a 4-foot sea on Friday. Looking at Kodiak Island, 10 to 15 knots on either side, 10 knots inside of Bristol Bay, south and easterlies crossing the Alaska Peninsula with 4 to 7 foot seas, 8 foot seas from Castle Cape to Chignik on Thursday afternoon. As we get into Friday, the winds start to come back up again, and you can see the higher seas starting to build in south of the Alaska Peninsula. 25 knots in all areas, 4-foot seas in Shelikof Strait, 11-foot seas down the Bering Sea coast, and 14 to 17-foot seas on the Pacific coast for your Friday. Thursday in the chain, south and easterly winds there for the central and eastern chain, 35 knots and 13-foot seas, 16-foot seas south of Adak and Atka, and a west-northwesterly flow shapes up for Kiska out towards Shemya there on a 20 to 25 knot wind. For Friday, winds still coming in from the west and northwest. We'll start to see faster winds picking up from Adak to Atka at 45 knots with 20 to 24-foot seas developing in that region. And once again, the higher seas should stay south of the chain with 12 to 15-foot seas north across the Bering Sea coast. And you'll notice another surge of higher seas building generally west of the Pribilovs here. Let's take a look at that. As we get across the west coast for Thursday, offshore flow across Nunavak Island and across the Kuskokwim Delta, 15 to 20 knots, 30 knots from St. Paul and St. George. There are those higher seas we were just looking at on Thursday. Southwesterlies into Norton Sound over the ice. As we get into Friday, the higher seas are kind of moving around St. Paul and St. George with 35 knots and 14-foot seas around St. Matthew, 12-foot seas around St. Paul and St. George on a 30-knot easterly flow, and northeasterlies coming out of Norton Sound and the Bering Strait, 20 to 30 with 7-foot seas south of St. Lawrence Island. Now for the North Slope, easterlies and blizzard conditions continue. For the Beaufort Seacoast there over the ice, look for a southerly flow outside of Kotzebue Sound and a stronger easterly flow off Cape Lisburne and Point Hope at 35 knots. As we get into Friday, north and easterly winds continue for the Beaufort Seacoast, 15 to 20, and an offshore flow is expected for the Chukchi Coast at about 15 to 25. Let's recap your weather over the next 24 hours or so. Several other waves of low pressure will be working through the region across the North Gulf. A 1,000 millibar low will help to bring in a period of heavy rain for parts of southeast. Expect that to pick up. At this time, flooding is not expected in the region. Across the interior, periods of rain and snow and even some freezing rain may mix in with that, as warm air is certainly being found across the Alaska Range and into the central interior. On top of that, high wind warnings are expected for many along the Alaska Range and Deltana Tanana Flats region. Gusts on the order of 50 to 70 miles per hour may be possible as we head through the evening hours. A lot of that will taper off as we head into tomorrow. Blizzard warnings, though, are expected to continue for the North Slope, those until about 3 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. 2 to 3 inches of snow in general, but it's the gusts up to 50 miles per hour that'll be the big issue there. A very complex situation of low pressure out across the southern Bering and North Pacific is moving eastward. That moves into the Gulf as we head into Friday and will turn into our next big weather maker for southern Alaska and reinforcing another wave of rain for southeast. Thanks for watching Alaska Weather.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.